Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boy.
With an emergency fund for beginners. When it comes to emergency funds, the first place a lot of people hear about an emergency fund comes from Dave Ramsey's 7 Baby Steps. An emergency fund helped me 100% when it came for getting out of debt. An emergency fund helped me 100% when it came to avoiding emergencies or obstacles when it came to finances in my life. A emergency fund 100% helped me achieve my student loan debt payoff goal. I paid off $30,000 by having an emergency fund because I was hit with plenty of wealth, financial emergencies along the way, that having that emergency fund helped me out. I don't want to keep this video from playing too long though, so we're going to go ahead and get straight into the video, and then we can talk more about it afterwards. Let's go ahead and let's get to it.
According to Bankrate, as of 2024, 27% of Americans don't have an emergency fund, the highest percentage since 2020. If one of your goals is to start building those emergency funds, we are here to help. Lawrence Sprung, Midland Financial founder and author of Financial Planning Made Personal, joins us in studio. Lawrence, great to have you here with us. So as you're trying to build an emergency fund, where is the right place to start?
Yeah, so you have to figure out what the amount is that you need or want for the emergency fund, and then start budgeting for it. Create a budget that includes a monthly amount that's going to go towards that emergency fund until you've built that up.
So how do you go about the calculus and making sure that you are coming to the right conclusion of what that number should be?
Yeah, so that's different for everybody. And depending upon your life facts and circumstances, you'll really want to look at that for your personal situation. For example, if you're in a role that you know if you lose your job tomorrow, you can replace it very quickly, then you can essentially be on the lower side, maybe 3 to 6 months. If you're self-employed and worried about the ebbs and flows of your business, you might need something in the range of 12 to 18 months, depending.
And so where should it be deployed towards as you're thinking about what you've said?
All right, so the first thing when it comes to an emergency fund, I want to talk about the amount that your goal for an emergency fund first. When you first go out and you set out to have an emergency fund, there are things that you need to consider in your life to decide how much of an emergency fund you should have. What goals do you have in your life? What point in your life are you at? All depend on how much of an emergency fund you should have. For example, let's say you're just starting out, but you have a goal to get out of debt. The one that everyone should know is Dave Ramsey's 7 ways to get out of debt. 7 baby steps for getting out of debt. In one of those baby steps, he says how much you should have in an emergency fund while you're trying to pay off debt. Because you can have all this, if you have a lot of capital just sitting for an emergency fund, you're actually losing a lot more value, especially if you have like high APRs and credit cards, than it would be for you to actually pay that debt off and live at a lower rate in general. So for when you're just starting out, Dave Ramsey says $2,000 is pretty much all you need. For me, that's literally all I needed, $2,000. So I was able to save $2,000. You have your budget. You have your little budget that you set aside monthly. That'll add you up to your $2,000. Once you have that $2,000, put it in a separate bank account. We can talk about what type of bank account later. Separate bank account, and just leave it there for any emergency that you may have while you're paying off your debt. This helps you be able to focus on paying off your debt without having anxiety about if something was to come up. It wouldn't it wouldn't derail you from the goal that you had set of paying off your debt. This for me happened, I would say, pretty much every single quarter that I was going towards paying off my debt. Something went wrong with my car, guys. Something went wrong with my car. Most things with your car, a lot of them are simple things, like a pop tire. You know, like a pop tire. You need an oil change, even though you should be budgeting for that oil change. That should be budgeting your car. A lot of people, you know, it's just like, ah, man, I got to come up with this money for this oil change. You need an oil change. For me, it was oil batteries going out on me. All of those are two of them. The wheels and the battery happened so much. It's ridiculous. Like it happened. It's ridiculous. Or you may have an insurance deductible that you have to pay or something like that. Having that emergency fund helps you to still be able to focus on your debt goals while not sacrificing your life. You feel me? You can focus on your goal. You can still hit those goals that you want to hit financially with just having $2,000, and then you just save up and you budget right back up to getting that $2,000 buffer in your pockets. So while I was paying off my debt, that $2,000, it helped me 1,000%. I think that was the most important thing. Me having that emergency fund, that $2,000 sitting to the side, was the most important, one of the most important factors that came from me paying off my debt, because I was never derailed from pretty much anything that happened. Of course, there are large scale things that can happen, like you need to replace your whole car. That also happened to me. But having that $2,000 emergency fund on the side definitely helped. Then you have the part in life where, you know, you might not be worried about paying off your debt, but you just want to have just in case you lose your job or you're going through a midlife crisis and all that stuff. The first target is like 3 months, then 6 months, then maybe a year, depending on who you are. For me, I know now I'm getting into the 3-month territory. So I have an emergency fund of 3 months sitting to the side. Just calculated how much I needed for 3 months. And honestly, I calculated my bare bones, because if I was to lose a job, I'm not going to be out of work probably more than a month. I'm humble enough to go back and work at Walmart instead of struggling. I'm humble enough to get back in that warehouse. I'm humble enough to go get a job. I've done them all before. It's not going to change now. However, having that emergency fund will give me a buffer for the amount of time that I can go without having a job. Now, my overall goal would be possibly to have I'm cool with a 6-month buffer. I'm cool with a 6-month buffer. So at 6-month buffer, I would honestly slow down, because I know that 6 months is probably like the limit, even at a lowered the limit that I would be comfortable sitting at. Let's continue.
Essentially, be on the lower side, maybe 3 to 6 months. If you're self-employed and worried about the ebbs and flows of your business, you might need something in the range of 12 to 18 months, depending.
And so where should it be deployed towards as you're thinking about what you've saved up, and then what the first items on that checklist should make sure that they're accounted for if you do need to tap into that emergency fund?
Yeah, so I would start with setting up a separate account where you have what that goal amount is set aside in your mind or on paper or part of your plan, and then start allocating money into that account each month. And typically high yield savings accounts, high yield money markets, those work really well because it gives you a higher rate of interest than you're going to get from the bank, and it's immediately liquid. So if that emergency rises tomorrow, you can tap in, get that money without any penalties or hassles.
A Bankrate study from 2024 found that 38% of Americans were willing to go into debt.
All right, y'all, let's talk about where you should place this emergency fund. use a high yield savings account, y'all. That's what I'll say off the jump. You want to know some high yield savings accounts, look them up. I think SoFi, that's an online banking. SoFi, a lot of online bankers are the ones that you'll get high yield savings account with. So SoFi, I use American Express strictly because there's different things that come with it. Like if you really want a high yield savings account with SoFi, they want you to be putting in your monthly check into their banking system. I don't want to really tap into that banking system, so I went with American Express. I'm already with American Express, so I get a almost 4. I think it's at 3.9%, 3.9% each month for my emergency fund just sitting in that account. Now, for the past 3 years, y'all, I've been stubborn. And I kept it in my regular bank account, not making nothing on this money. Just because I was stubborn, guys. Just because I was stubborn and I didn't feel like doing the research I didn't feel like doing the research to actually know or to understand why I needed that high yield savings account. As far as not putting it into the market. You feel me? I wouldn't advise you putting your emergency fund into the market, which is like your stocks and bonds and all that stuff. But having it sitting on the side somewhere where you're actually making a actual return on your money is definitely important, because a lot of these banks like Chase, Wells Fargo, American, you're not getting a lot back on having your money sitting in a savings account with those banks. Like I was getting with that $2,000, I was probably seeing like a cent a month, like literally pennies on a dollar. Now I have whatever amount I have sitting in this bank, my American Express high yield savings account. I make now $30 a month because I have about $10,000 sitting in there, but I get $30 a month. Now, if this was sitting in my other account, I'd be getting like 3 cents. And my other savings account, 3 cents. And I'm looking like, yo, this makes no sense. And I'm sitting here like, y'all, I'm leaving money on the table. You're just leaving money on the table if you don't have it in a high yield savings account. Yes, a little $30 doesn't seem like much. But if you think about it, I've left, if it's $30 a month, well, it's probably a little less than that. Even if it was, I've left at least $100 on the table with my little $2,000 sitting in there a month. Like I said, I've had this savings emergency fund for 3 years now. I left a lot of money on the table, and that emergency fund wasn't always just that 2,000. Of course, it went up, which means I would have been getting more. Of course, it went down while I was adding back up to that. But overall, learn early and just go ahead and get you a high yield savings account if you have just money just kind of not being used in the market, or you're saving, or you have an emergency. Yeah, high yield savings account all the way, because you don't want to be lacking like the Richest Steve in Atlanta was. I had to learn from experience, when in reality I didn't have to. If I would have just listened to some of the things that people were saying, or some of the wisdom that other people were giving out right here on YouTube.
Bankrate study from 2024 found that 38% of Americans were willing to go into debt for discretionary purchases like travel or entertainment. What's more of a risk here, taking a credit card balance or dipping into that emergency fund?
Yeah, so I think, definitely taking that credit card balance. If ultimately push comes to shove, you have to access that money, you're better off dipping into that emergency fund. Hopefully you refill it before your next emergency arises, because then you might need to dip into the credit card balance. But you have to be able to, be flexible with your planning and understand that, just by taking out of the emergency fund and not going to the credit card doesn't mean that you've solved all your problems. You still have to plan for that emergency.
All right, I'm hoping that people don't have to pull a Brian McKnight and start back at one. But if they do have to tap into that emergency fund and then start over and rebuilding that, what are your tips for starting over?
Same thing that you did when you started out. Figure out what that emergency fund amount should be, create how much you can put in on a monthly basis, and start socking it away in that separate account until you've reached that amount that you've set as your goal. And then you're back in business. And then once you've hit that goal and it's tapped out, you can then reallocate those monies to other places in your budget that might require them.
Generationally,
I will tell y'all from experience, when you tap into that emergency fund, replenishing it is usually easier than it was to save up even that little first part. I'm not gonna lie to y'all. When I had to tap into my emergency fund, most of the time I had that emergency fund right back filled within the next month or 2 or 3, honestly, filled while I was still able to focus on my financial goals. So I would advise you, make sure it's a real emergency that you're actually tapping into your emergency fund for. Like, I wouldn't say going on vacation is not an emergency fund. It's not emergency fund worthy. Not having money and your friend inviting you to brunch and you tapping into your emergency, that's not emergency fund worthy. It's just not. You can't pay your water bill, your electric bill, your internet bill for the month. That's tap into your emergency fund worthy. And that's just in my opinion. Some people say, no, it got to be even worse than that for you to tap into your emergency fund. Hey, you have to know what is worth you tapping into that emergency fund for, because you don't want to have to keep on taking away from your financial goals to refill this emergency fund for a bunch of bull. Let's be real. For you to go have a good time and play around, you're just derailing yourself doing a lot of those things. Let's go on and finish this up.
How does the emergency fund planning shift as you are later on in life versus earlier on, and just doing some larger planning of how you get started?
Yeah, so I think earlier on, there's a lot more, risks, right? You can have a risk of losing a job, you have a house. As you age, maybe you don't have.
Yeah, I feel like I kind of hit that already. So we don't have to listen to that. Yeah, but y'all, emergency funds is actually a very easy thing for you to have. When you're young, of course, you will not have a big emergency fund, but I'm telling y'all, the peace of mind that I had knowing that if there was ever an emergency that happened, I would be good. Not to say anything crazy or something, but think about it. It's a lot of incidents that go along. One of your friends might, it's sad to say, one of your friends might need you to bail them out. Might need you to bail them out. Having an emergency fund will definitely help. It's a lot of weird situations. It's a lot of crazy situations, where your emergency fund will help you out. Now, I'll tell you, you may be on vacation one time. Something happened crazy with your flight, and now you gotta leave early or something, man. Tap into that emergency fund. That's a real emergency. Yeah, they may say vacation, but those are real emergencies. Having an emergency fund, that it literally changed my whole outlook on finances in general, because I was not worried. I wasn't worried anymore about some mundane random thing happening. Like my car, honestly, that 2016 Sentra that I was driving around in, I'm telling y'all, the amount of problems I faced with that car every single quarter, that's every 3 months, something new was happening with that car. And before that emergency fund, y'all, it used to stress me out. Like, I just know something wrong is about to happen with this car, and I don't know where the money's going to come from. Soon as I started that emergency fund, I didn't have those issues anymore. If I had to get some work done on it, I got an emergency fund for this. As long as it's under $2,000, I know I can cover this. That's it. And that's in life in general. Most emergencies are not going to be over $2,000 in a lot of our lives. Most emergencies will not be over $2,000. And that's great. That in general gave me peace of mind. Y'all let me know how y'all feel about an emergency fund, like different things that y'all have, different tips that y'all have for people in general. Like, and let me know how much you have for your emergency fund in the comments. So make sure y'all like, subscribe, and leave that comment so I know where y'all stand with your emergency fund.